All right, welcome back. So the last thing to talk about with cards has to do with when we have multiple cards, how we display them. So you can use the grid system, but there's also a couple of built-in options too. So at the very bottom of the card docs, there's a card layout section. And you can see that there's something called a card group, which you can use to render multiple cards as a single element, where we have equal width and equal height items. So we don't use the grid at all here. You just say card group, and then however many cards are in there, the space will be split up, and they will be equal height. Now, a word of warning about all of these is that they're not entirely responsive yet. For the time being, it says. So we'll see if there's an update. Now, some of them will, so like you can see the card group, it does switch over at some point to be a full 100% of the width. Once we get to extra small or small, the problem is we don't really have control over that breakpoint. We can't say, I want 2 in a group at medium and 3 in a group, or I want you to take up 6 units versus 3. We can't say that. So it's an easy way to achieve this, which let's just do it now. I have a new file, and we'll make a single card. First, we make our card group like this. You can scroll down to see the layout. Card group, and then you just put your cards in there. So why don't I just steal one of these cards instead of wasting your time and making the card again? Let's go with, I don't know, let's do this first one here that has the image in it. I don't need the column, I just need the card. Come over here, paste it in, and our card for now takes up all available space. This was the card that we used. Now if I make another card and paste it below, and this one, I'll give it we'll change the image, but let's also do a lot more lorem ipsum to make it taller. So lorem 40 and save. Now you can see that they are attached and they are equal height, even though this one has a lot more content in it. Okay, I changed the image just to make it clearer. They're not in a container right now, are they? Nope, they are not. So I definitely would do that just to make it a little nicer. Paste that in. All right, so now they're attached together. And it works, but this is not great here. They do switch over at extra small, but we don't actually have control over that. So I don't actually use card groups very often unless it really makes sense. But like this is just not good. But you could override this, especially once we get into the Sass. It's just not out of the box. Okay, so that is what's called a card group. So why don't I add a little note in here that just says, I don't know, how about H3 card group, save. All right, so next, also you can do it with footers, and their footers will all line up, which can look nice. But next up, there's also this thing called card decks. So when you use a card deck, it's the same idea, but they're not attached to one another, but they are equal width and height. So we could take the exact same content and just change card group to card deck. And just like before, if you add a footer, so why don't I do that this time? The footers will line up. So I'll come down here. I'll just duplicate this entire series like this and just change it to say card deck. Right now it still is a card group. But then as soon as I change this right here, card deck, we now get spacing. And if I added in a third card, they split up all that space evenly. And let's just add a footer in. So to do that, after the body, we do .card footer. And in there, let's just say this is a footer. All right, so that one has a footer. And let's apply a footer to the second one. This is also a footer. And now we have 2 footers, they line up. Change the images or add a third one in, which I'll do now. Okay, so I added a third card in, I changed some of the images, and you can see what we get, right? So this is a card group, or excuse me, card deck. This is a card group. They're attached here. Either way, however many cards are in there, the available space will be split. And it is at some point, right there, it works, but it's not ideal, especially if you have a lot of text. This is just awful. Now the last option is what's called card columns. So card columns are a bit different, where there's this thing called masonry, which they talk about in the docs, which is a famous, or relatively famous tool for arranging images on things like Tumblr. It's been used all over the internet, where you can take images of different sizes and heights and create this cascading grid layout where things aren't necessarily aligned. So you can do that with card columns. So here we have card columns. It's exactly the same. You just change card dash group or card dash deck to card columns. So let's test it out. Come over here and duplicate everything once again, and I'll add some other cards that are not image cards. So I will duplicate all of this and change this to say card columns. And then here we come and do card, is it columns or column? I think it's S, plural, yes, columns. And then let's add some additional cards in there. I might just steal some of their cards that they've already done. So let's add this one here. And then we've got another card with text. So these are just plain boring text cards. And one more. And let's add that one down here. And save. And let's just see what we get. There we go. So now we have this grid system with these cards that are sort of, it's also should be relatively responsive. Things do move around when they need to. As you can see there, it's just, you don't have a lot of control over it again. But this can work well, depending on what you're building it for. And honestly, that's pretty much it to cards. So there was a lot we talked about, but in this video, we talked about layout. So we had card group, where they're attached together. Then we had card deck, where they're not attached, but they're equal height and width. They split all that space. And then we had card columns, which works sort of like, the reason it's called masonry is the original library is that it's, imagine like you're a stonemason and you're trying to fit all these different size things together into as compact a space as possible. So that's what this will do for you. And as I show down here, once you get into CSS and changing the sass, you can change the column count for card columns. So you could say at extra large, I want there to be 5 columns, and at medium, I only want 2. So you can alter it, but out of the box, it's not something that we can do until we start writing sass. All right, so that's cards. We talked about the basics of cards. We talked about colors. We talked about images, and then we talked about layout. They're really useful, and we'll be using them in one of our little projects.